most of my experience internationally has been working on conflict and post-conflict. And WILF provides that amazing framework within which we can look at both the causes of conflict in terms of militarization, arms expenditure, the threat of nuclear warfare, and the work that I have done, joining the work that I have done on looking what happens to women in conflict, looking what happens to them in the post-conflict moment, and why we need to address human rights as transformative of law, so that women can so that law actually starts to describe the living experiences of women. And WILF gives us the opportunity of doing that because we have, as I said, the first one we work very much on demilitarization, the disarmament. We work on the women, peace and security agenda, and now I'm here to try and draw both of those two together through the lens of human rights into the international human rights mechanisms.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us when you first became an advocate for women's rights?
Well, I said to WILF, and I wrote on the website, that I became an advocate for women's rights when I was 2. Actually, I lied. It was probably 3. But essentially, I think that I'm one of those people that you see things are not working quite right, and you realise that you need to advocate for them. And because of the era I was brought up in, when feminism was really making a difference, starting to make a difference, and challenging existing norms, it was something I became passionately engaged in. And then, because of that, started working with women's rights through rape crisis centres, through domestic violence centres, went abroad, did the same sort of work, and then gradually got sucked into doing law and using law as a framework to assert women's rights. Okay,
great. That segues into the next question about, what really led you to become a lawyer.
Yeah, well, I used to be a teacher, and then went to Nicaragua for various reasons, but I ended up in Nicaragua and met with AMLI, who were the women's wing of the Sandinistas, and they were there writing the Constitution, the women's part of the Constitution. I'd met them before, so it wasn't just dropping in for the day sort of thing. And they had this vision, this amazing vision of women working internationally to bring what they were trying to do through their revolution into an international framework of solidarity. Because, they were looking to me to tell them what we'd done in terms of domestic violence in Britain, what we'd done in terms of rape crisis, because they had the same problems. There may have been a revolutionary movement, but they had the same issues. And what they wanted was us to have this international solidarity. And they said to me, why aren't you a lawyer? Because that's what we want. And I thought, actually, you're right. I was completely sold on the idea, and I went back to the United Kingdom, and I re-qualified. So it was them. It was them. Completely responsible for my transformation from teacher to lawyer.
Excellent. Can you tell us about your work with the United Nations in Bosnia and what kind of issues you had to deal with there?
I got there I started working in Bosnia in 1997, joined the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in 1998, and was very, very lucky to have been serving under Mary Robinson, who is one of the great advocates of human rights. The office had just done an evaluation of what was happening in Bosnia so that they could see what was needed. And they gave us an incredible mandate, which was basically discrimination, rule of law, discrimination, economic and social rights, and gender. So, basically that meant I had carte blanche to do what I needed to do, which we didn't have a huge office, we didn't have the sorts of resources that would have been wonderful, and we didn't have the placing within the international community that some of the big guys had, like the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, like the Office of the High Representative. But we ended up looking very much at the situation of women post-conflict, of course, looking at trafficking, which became just the most enormous and horrendous problem in Bosnia and undermined the integrity of the state tremendously. And also looking at then issues relating to the post-conflict moment, if you like, when there were these issues of Muslim fundamentalism, so-called, and illegal rendition from Bosnia to the United States. So we did the first rendition case in international law. In fact, won it, but so what, because the men were still in Guantanamo. But so those were sorts of things we'd do. We'd look at the constitutional framework. We would bring cases, sort of emblematic cases, to show particular types of discrimination, because that's clearly where much of the problems lay in Bosnia. So it was very varied, it was very challenging, very rewarding, and I'm just very sorry that we were not able to do more.
Can you tell us a little bit about who is Kathryn Bolkovac and what was her situation with DynCorp?
Kathryn Bolkovac, she was an IPTF officer, which meant she worked for the UN as a civilian, working with the police. We had a program working with the Department of Peacekeeping Operations to work on gender-based violence with the international police to help the local police do better. I interviewed her and thought she was a very good candidate to be the gender officer, if you like. And she got involved in doing lots of training and all the rest of it. And then that morphed into a position on trafficking, because by the time she came to Bosnia, it was clear that this was a serious problem, and nothing was being done about it. So she was assigned really to do the investigation. So she was interviewing women who had been trafficked, she was finding out what was going on, and she found out a little bit too much of what was going on, and challenged the United Nations as to what they were doing about it. I mean, it took a long, long time for it to come to that. She and I worked very closely together, so both of us were challenging, only I had protection and she did not. So when she confronted them, they said she was burnt out, they said that she was incorrect, and they demoted her. They took her off the position, demoted her. And I fought on her behalf, and then essentially they sacked her. They made up some fraudulent claims of timesheet fraud, and they removed her completely. And they could do that because she was dismissed by DynCorp, because DynCorp is the hiring agent, the subcontractor for the US government in providing police to serve in UN missions. So she was actually directly an employee of DynCorp, and then only then under the United Nations. Well, when she showed me her contract, I saw that in fact her contract was with DynCorp had a head office or an office, registered office in the United Kingdom. So I suggested that we sue them in the United Kingdom, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Okay. Great. Can you tell us a little bit about your opinion of the film The Whistleblower?
I haven't seen it all the way through because it's not out yet. I mean, it's in the film festivals. Unfortunately, I didn't see it last week. I saw it in its various bits because I went to the film set and saw it being made. And I know the story, and I must admit, when I saw certain parts of it, I went outside and wept, because I just felt we had not done enough. How dare we be there and not change it? It is an amazing film. And the sad thing about it is that everything that happened in the film is absolutely true. It is not true that every character did all those things, or every character had those things done to them. It's a composite, because the writers brilliantly researched and tried to bring home what had happened in Bosnia and how it had happened by using a composite of different stories. But that composite is absolutely accurate. So although, I'm played by Vanessa Redgrave, which is just like one of my greatest heroines of all time and one of the greatest actors of all time, and there's her being me, which is very weird. But she's not really me. She's sort of essence of me, doing a slightly different job to the job, but slightly differently to the way I actually did it. But that's not the point. The point is it's an excellent vehicle for explaining the nature of trafficking, what it is, and what happens when you don't have sufficient regulatory frameworks, you don't have sufficient leadership, and you don't actually hold accountable those who should be accountable for committing grave crimes.
With all that said, what messages you would like us to take home and use?
That's a big question. I think there are so many things that I would like her to pay attention to. One is looking at the militarization. Do you know how much money is spent on conflict and arms? I mean, I'm one of those people that $1 trillion means nothing to me. It's just too many noughts. But if you translate it into what that actually means in practice, like the war in Afghanistan, $300 billion, I think it is so far. That's a check for $300,000 to each man, woman, and child in Afghanistan. That's God knows how many schools and healthcare and on and on and on. It's the amount of money spent on just on arms in a day is enough to survive to supply the United Nations budget for a year. The whole thing is completely disproportionate. And when you're making guns, they have to be used because you have to keep on. Your production must continue. So everything Eisenhower was saying about the military-industrial complex taking over if we're not careful has and is continuing to happen. So I think we need to look at that and say, is that what we want to spend our money on? Is that truly going to bring us security? That's one message. The other message would be, we need to stop talking about conflict as conflict being inevitable and take the necessary measures to prevent. And if we want to prevent, then we've really got to be looking at how we use human rights to actually do that. And that always sounds like naive, idealist human rights, nice, soft, and all the rest of it. But human rights is law, and basically it's something that everybody can identify with because it's what you would like to have happen to you. They're your needs. They're not your needs for protection, for security, for food, for health, for water, for education, all those things. Those are human rights. And what we need to be doing is trying to make sure that those things are provided for. If we do that, that will mitigate against the move towards conflict. And that's, I think, we really have to be looking at that and how we use the international legal mechanisms to get states engaged in that process, to move away from the realpolitik that we have now, which subordinates human rights concerns to what are considered to be state concerns, and seeing that they actually are harmonious, that protecting human rights actually does bring greater security. I mean, you can see what has happened with the war on terror and resiling by the United States in particular of the absolute prohibition on torture. The credibility of the United States as an advocate for human rights has suffered enormously. And it also means that other regimes think, oh, well, it's not so bad, we can do it too. And that means that everybody suffers. And I think that's something we really, really have to insist upon, is that we hold everybody accountable by our standards, and we must be held accountable by those as well.